All right, welcome back, Aspire to Lead listeners. I'm so excited about this week. And I mean, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm so grateful that you're here with us as I've got a brilliant author, educator, leader, and this is Dr. Richard Bernato, and he's coming from New York. And I've had an opportunity to get to know him prior to pushing this record button, and he's just a phenomenal mind. I can't wait for this conversation, and I'm so excited, Richard, for you to be a part of this show. So thank you so much for being here.
I can't begin to tell you how much I appreciate the opportunity and the kind words. I hope I can live up to that.
Oh my gosh, I know you will. And so I was telling you, I've had a chance to get through your book, Co-Creating the Future, and super excited about what we're going to talk about. But before we do that, will you just share a little bit about your educational leadership journey?
Okay, have you got? We could do a whole half hour on that. The short story is I've been in education for 55 years and counting. Starting with social studies teaching back before you were born, and in a suburban school, maybe 50 miles outside of New York City. Although clearly my accent tells you I grew up in New York City. So I was a pretty good social studies teacher who became enamored of simulations while I was teaching, and pretty successful at that. And that led me into a number of different investigative trails about and researching experiential learning and how or whether that is effective in working with students. And those of you in education know that experiential learning means a lot of different things. And is often poo-pooed by leaders, or rather, I should say, teachers who don't necessarily know how to make it work in a classroom. So I got much more involved in formal leadership training up the road, maybe about 10 or 15 years into my actual teaching career. I became a curriculum specialist in my school district, where I modeled a lot of these kinds of things and helped people design experiential role-play simulation approaches to learning in all subject areas: thinking skills, process skill thinking, decision-making, and so forth, creative thinking, before they had those words for those premises. And then I got in the ladder. I became everybody becomes a dean or one place or another. So I chased kids who threw pizza across the floor for a little while, and paid my dues with that. And I had some pupil services positions, and eventually became what I actually stepped down from central office at one point, because the principalship opened up. I always wanted to be just a principal. Just as a strange word when you know what principals really do. So I became a principal for nine to 10 years. Those were the best years of my professional career on that count. I ultimately became an assistant superintendent for instruction and a quasi superintendent every once in a blue moon when those things came along. Parallel to that, I was lucky enough to begin to get into some adjunct professor positions in a couple of local colleges. And so when I left the K-12 world, I never really left it, but when I formally departed from those sets of roles, I automatically became a professor of social studies methods, of leadership in general. And so the idea of the role-playing and experiential began to weld with my own personal philosophical theories about what leadership should be all about. And often, well, I don't want to say often is not, but it probably needs more love than it often gets. And so I began to really look into that and do considerable research on that. And so the last parts of my career have been largely spent in various universities, mentoring doctoral students in their own research and in consulting in a number of different ways across many places. My own sets of webinars, my own sets of podcasts, actually, although I already can tell that Joshua knows a lot more about it than I do, as far as making it look much more appealing than I can do. I did have some fun with that. Actually, I was doing podcasts before anybody else ever heard of them, but that's because
I believe it.
That's because I'm old. But at any rate, it's been fun. It's been fun. I've written a few books. This last one maybe my last book. I don't know. I don't think it will be, but I often will call it my Mona Lisa. And I was thinking about what I meant by that yesterday. And by that, I meant that a Mona Lisa is your so-called masterpiece because it kind of synthesizes some of the things I've shared with you now. Uh, but I always thought of at least the Mona Lisa is meant to catalyze responses and to get people to uh, turn themselves on to see what the possibilities are. And so I took this premise of futuring with this premise of simulation, with ideas about what leadership should be all about, and I created a simulation that became this book. So the book is physically a book, but what it really is a simulation that leaders can use in any level of organizations, not necessarily just schools, but primarily devoted to the K-12 world and higher ed too, for that matter, where one can simulate leadership design within a futures-based framework. I'm talking too much. I'll stop.
No, you're actually bridging what I want to talk about because one, the premise of it is super fascinating. Like I wanted to dig in probably too fast into this book because of the topic with simulation. And this is a topic that I haven't even addressed or touched on with Aspire to Lead. So I'm really excited about where this conversation might go. First off, though, I want to say that this is a really beautiful book in the sense that just the structure of it. I obviously have an art lens, so like I was looking at the graphic design elements of it, but then also the resources that are put in it are very impactful and something that could be used right away with our leadership. So kudos to you for the construction of the book because I think it's phenomenal. But I wanted to get into the 7 phases because simulation for me, I have very little knowledge in that. Obviously, I have preconceived ideas or some assumptions based on some things that I've heard over the years. But for you, I'd love for you to just kind of walk through, that leadership simulation, the 7 phases, and how it might help planning for the future.
Well, the first premise to consider is that everybody simulates every day in all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
You said you have 6 children, and those children are simulating all day long with the toys they play with. And then we're not even going to necessarily get into the video game thing, but it's only video games are simulations where you take a role, ROLE, and you work within a simplified model of reality, and you make decisions as you move along to kill the dragon or to run away from the dragon or so forth. Cowboys and Indians, I know, is not anything children play nowadays, but they probably play games that are something similar to that. Every movie you see, every book you read, especially a fiction book, is a simplified form of reality. And so we do if you think about the armed forces, they have war games. And what they're doing is they're simulating warfare so that they don't make mistakes, the mistakes they can make safely within the game in order to be more effective in the real deal. And on top of that, and again, any Broadway show you've been to, has been rehearsed over and over before it got to that kind of presentation. So we simulate all the time. But when we professionally develop leaders or professional educators, if you think about it, those of you who are teachers or administrators, it's dangerous to really implement radical change because we're not talking about whether a pen is going to be better to write with. We're talking about trying something that's going to affect children. And so you can't try to do something, or with the staff members for that matter, that might fall flat on its face and have terrible repercussions. And so the premise of PD, of professional development, enables, is enhanced by a simulation where you can create a simplified form of reality, have leaders and role players make decisions within that, I can't pronounce this word, milieu. And so that if they come up with some good premises that they can translate back to the ground in their real world, that's great. If they can't, then they're not hurting anybody. It's risk-free. And so what I did was I designed this simulation grounded in the simulation experiential approaches, those 7 stages that you allude to. And then I also identified roles, ROLESs, where these people and groups can interact with each other to make decisions together or make decisions in opposition to each other, if that's how the dynamic rolls, so that we can't even necessarily guess where that goes. Now, all that's grounded, I know I'm talking too much again, is futuring. The premise that skill set, it's about futuring is about forecasting. It's not about predicting, it's about forecasting probabilities, narrowing the probabilities so that you know what you think will probably happen and decide whether that probable future matches up with what you want to happen, the preferable future. And if the preferable future and the probable futures don't align with each other or interface with each other, that's a problem. And so if I want we were talking about mental health before. If I want I want to reduce the amount of stress that students are clearly feeling, what with the number of issues that have come our way in the past several years, if not for longer than that, COVID crisis being the most immediate point, perhaps, even although I'm not even sure that holds up to what may be happening up the road. Then I can create solutions that I can try out within the simulation that may work or may not. If they don't work, we haven't hurt any children. If they do work, we can tailor them to bring them out and truly apply them outward. So this premise of futuring and forecasting is as natural as simulation. If you're a gardener like I used to be, you knew you had to get the ground ready when the ground was ready to be tilled and planted. Farmers certainly understand that. Squirrels know when to bury their acorns. We all know what we want to prepare for. We want to future for within how we see things going on. And so there are 3 kinds of futures, really 4, but I'll give you 3. What's possible? Most anything is possible. What's probable? That's where you have to get more skilled about learning certain skills that you can learn within the simulation activities. And what's preferable? And then design your systems to more nearly assure the preferable and minimize the probable that you don't want. Another word I use sometimes is what the emerging future looks like. Some people say you can't predict the future. No, you can't predict the future specifically, but you can forecast what the likelihoods of things are. And skilled leaders need to teach themselves and their stakeholders how to use those skills together with some other skill sets that are embedded into the simulation that's offered here, the co-creating the future simulation. Those 7 stages build across in a linear way, which is kind of artificial in certain senses. We gather data. Yep. P.S. The gathering the data premise is, I'm smiling because I have another simulation I'm working on with another professor, is being kind of taken care of in a different way. That's spelled AI, but that's another conversation. But you gather information from as many sources as you can, and you distill it. You don't make assumptions about that. Once you can distill that, you move to the second stage where you begin to burn off what you think your purposes are within the value systems that you've identified, within the activities that the simulation provides. Then you start teaching them 2-dimensional futuring, which is if-then thinking. If I punch somebody in the nose, their nose bleeds, then they will punch me back in my nose, then my nose will bleed as an if-then. Superficial if-then, which is how we usually think. We spend a lot of our life in that. I forgot the book. Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow is described very nicely by Kahneman in that order. But then you want to get to 3rd dimension, which is the next phase, where now after having gotten the information and after interacting with and voting with each other and negotiating about the various ideas that are flying around, they begin to narrow their probable futures. And then they're required to create scenarios. Now, if you watch any cable news network, I don't care which one it is, you're hearing scenarios all day long. Well, if we do this, then that will happen, and the world will fall apart. And the things we hear most every night on cable TV are scenarios. Last night I was watching a mock football draft. If the Giants sign Aaron Rodgers, then they don't necessarily need to draft a quarterback on their third draft pick. Those are scenarios that people do, and people then in their own real lives make decisions based on what they think those scenarios are going to represent. That's where it becomes fun, actually. I mean, in terms of how the simulation goes. All within that, there's negotiating. There's two teams. One team is the immediate school system, educational leadership team. And the other team has much more influence than we sometimes realize, is the world out there. That would be the community, the federal government, the global situations, the economy, health systems, whichever is going on. It all bears down on how education responds, whether it proacts and steers that world out there or reacts to what the world out there demands of them. And I'm not sure which way that always flies. But they have to kind of work with each other in the end to agree on whether the scenario they settle on after a lot of negotiating and they're paying people off and all sorts of good things, where they agree on what they think whether they like what they think the probable future is. Example would being, okay, in District XYZ, there's very little will to change. They're perfectly fine with the demographics changing and the tax base being kind of drab, because they're going along to get along. So there's not much will to change, and there's not a lot of resources to change. So what does that look like? What is that 10 years from now? What would the scenario be? And they play that premise out. And then usually what will happen is someone will say, I don't like that scenario. It doesn't really enable our children and our community and our world to meet the emerging future that's out there 10 years from now. And so we have to really transform more clearly. And so we have to change how we realize things to take more studied, more creative ways to change how things might be in a school system. I'm talking too much. I apologize.
No, I'm taking this all in, and I want to tap into a word that you used, or maybe a phrase. You had talked about low risk, and I know for a lot of our educational leaders, there's a lot of fear that's embedded into trying new things, trying to implement something, and of course, I can imagine folks are saying, yes, I totally agree with Rich here. This sounds brilliant, but I want to know what the action plan is, right? How are we going to actually put this into play on the campus? So for our school leaders, if they're looking to actually complete a simulation, maybe in a low risk environment, what would that look like for them?
Well, again, by the way, there's several suggestions in the book about how you might want to implement the simulation. In a retreat fashion, or in a summer program, or in a regularly scheduled meetings across the course of a year. That's the one I recommend, actually.
Yeah, for sure.
But sometimes it's just not realistic. Something you just prompted me when you said that. We have to remember too that those of you who have or are taking leadership training courses now to become certified are lucky if you get a change course. I have a daughter taking a change course program. I'm taking an administrative degree right now, and the university she's in isn't particularly getting real deep in that, which drives me crazy, because there's not a district in the country, even though so-called Cadillac districts, that couldn't benefit from retooling and restructuring against that emerging future. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking as far as practical ways to implement it. I think you've kind of touched on that, as far as doing a retreat, a summer program, or actually constructing it so it's something that is a touch point throughout the year in staff meetings. I know for me specifically, one of my passions, and my listeners know this because I just wrote a book, Language of Behavior, was actually creating simulations for my staff as far as working with students, right? Doing the role playing as far as you're the teacher, you're the student,
Right.
and then also having someone that observe the interaction to give feedback as far
Right.
as in this scenario one, we're going to role play this and see what their reactions were, and we did that throughout the year. So that was one thing that I was thinking of, reading the book was, oh, I think I've done something similar to this. And I know my teachers were fearful because they had never experienced anything like that. But after they were done, there was a lot of good feedback as far as, I think this will help me as far as getting in a classroom and potentially seeing these things, or I have seen this and I don't think I actually did it correctly, or I could have done a better job in the moment. But now that I've role played it, I've had the stimulation to hopefully react in a better way.
Yeah, there's a role play and there's simulation. A simulation is a role play within a simulation, because simulations have gaming rules.
Gotcha.
So that's just a distinction to make. So we're playing Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I did a simulation a million years ago with 8th grade students. And this is going to sound sexist. I apologize. And I had one set of kids with females. They were 13 or 14 years old, and we went through these headlines. They were Austria, and they went through these headlines about who was building more submarines and who was making treaties and all these things. And they were sort of passive and sitting back. And we got to the headline where the Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. It was from Austria. So I turned to the kids and I said, "Well, what are you going to do about that? Your Archduke has been assassinated." And this is a true story. They said, "Nothing." So I looked at them and I said, "Really?" And I said, "Well, he was stupid. He shouldn't have gone there." So they averted World War I. And I love that because that's a matter of how the role they took spun off a little bit. But I, as teacher at that time, had to say, "Well, you said this, and that's great, but this is what really happened, and let's figure out why what you said didn't happen, and let's play that through," because there's an awful lot of critical thinking that goes on there. When they take a role, not play now, when they take the role and understand what's responsible and what their skill sets need to be, it's kind of a magical thing to see. I'll leave it at that. It's just, sometimes you can't forecast, you can't future for where a group's going to go, and it's up to the facilitator. I call them a catalyst in the book to give them other ways to consider.
Okay, let's go to the other side of the coin. So, are there certain mistakes that you see happen universally that maybe our leaders should stay away from as they're trying to implement simulations?
Well, what happens with that is, yeah, I have seen that, and what happens with that is the mindset of the individual person. They haven't taken the role necessarily, but that's one point. Like, for example, there are principles,
right?
PALS principles in the education leadership team, and they were given the responsibility within the book to be collaborative leadership specialists. But they didn't buy collaborative leadership as such. They were more accustomed to I am the king, I am the queen, and I'll just pass it on down. And what happened was they just sparked a pushback from the union president, who believed in the collaborative leadership system and didn't know why they had to do it. And so they had to reconcile that. And that can be a push-pull sometimes. But generally speaking, the energy that flows, I mean, I'm sounding new age here. I apologize for that. The energy that flows is people begin to meld and influence each other's thinking based on the process skills that I haven't explained very well now, but are in the book in those handouts that are described. Yeah, I've seen it. I can't deny that. But when they get to that next to last phase, where they try to decide whether they want to adapt to the probable future or transform from the probable future. That's when you get literally there's a debate set up in that phase, and then there's a vote, and you can see that people will have to come to consensus, and we all know that consensus among the school system is not so easy to bring off, though we talk about it.
Yeah, it's hard. It's very hard.
It is hard.
Yeah. So Rich, so this is something that's not about the book. You had talked about futuring and predictions. I think this is such a fascinating conversation too, just because I'm just kind of reflecting on my own leadership journey and thinking like I really probably didn't do a very good job of this, of trying to do the 3 stages that you talked about in regards to futuring. But I just want your personal opinion, because you've been doing this for so long and you probably think about this. I think of you as a very wise mind. So if you were to predict future problems for our leaders, is there anything that they should be maybe looking out for, or maybe preparing in the world of education?
Great question. Well, first thing I would do, I wouldn't use the word predict, because predict is way too specific.
Sure.
Forecast gives you some
forecast. Yes.
So now we're talking about emerging future, which requires a skill set of having all the information in front of you, rather than just coming from your perspective, your own agenda, and requires a melding of everything that's going on out there. In the book, you'll notice there's a 2-dimensional forecasting skill called cross-impact matrix. And that's a great, I didn't make it up, I got it from some research. That requires that you come up with a body, a set of however many probable futures you think will sort of might happen. And then what you do is you break it up across the top of the chart by the systems, by the individuals, by the community, by the Board of Education, by the tax base, and you try to see where the cross impacts are. And as you begin to say, okay, well, we don't have the means to really do much change, so we're going to go along to get along. That's a future. Unless someone says, well, the consequence of that is we'll continue to slide backwards, and the community could deteriorate even more than it is, as well as the school system, as well as the graduates who come out of that. Do we want that? Wouldn't necessarily emerge from a quick if-then. And so the more time we make, the word is used far too often, but it's the word I would like to use now. The more we make room for real reflection about the yes buts and what the if thens and what the probables and preferables are, the more we begin to sort out or separate the wheat from the chaff. And so you're more likely to minimize the negative things that may go on out there, because you've used those systems thinking approaches and future system approaches. I didn't even get into the creative thinking material now, though it is in the book. JFK, and before you were born, Joshua, JFK in the missile crisis knew there were missiles in Cuba, and the missiles were 15 minutes away from Miami, and the testosterone-laden military guys in his think tank all wanted to bomb Cuba to smithereens and then Russia. And Kennedy said, "I'm not sure I want to do that, but let's see what else can we think about." So Adlai Stevenson was the ambassador to the UN at one time, got up and said, we have missiles in Turkey, which are right on the border of Russia. Let's just take them out. We'll just trade it off. And they ran him out of the room, threw him out. Well, P.S., when Kennedy solved the Cuban Missile Crisis, that's what they did, because the creative idea was stifled by, I'm using a bad word, I suppose, the testosterone-laden thinking that was going on. And so you see, I'm not saying it's testosterone, but the pig-headed,
hot-headed,
yeah. Now, Otto Scharmer, who's described in the book, wrote a book called The Theory of You, and he calls it shedding old habits. Other people talk about design thinking, which is one of the buzzwords out there the last couple of years. It really basically says you don't accept the standard points until you get a chance to see how other things may force fit and reconnect. I mean, my Apple Watch is a computer on my wrist. That's a force fit. It's a computer clock on my wrist, which was a bracelet at one point. That's how creativity encourages new ways to do things. So if I was talking to a fellow a couple of days ago from a regional improvement agency, actually up by you, Colorado-ish, where he's serving the Navajo Nation, helping their education systems, who had 3/4 of their money slashed 3 weeks ago. It's gone. And so they had to eliminate over the weekend half of the staff. They could have stayed there and said, "Oh my heavens, what are we going to do?" Oh, nothing can happen. What they did was they created multi-grade schools that day, because they were using some creative juices rather than just accepting the future that's been imposed on them.
Wow. I love the examples that you're providing. This is brilliant, Rich. Thank you.
I wish I didn't have that story to tell you, but that's a true story.
Well, but if we're predicting, I mean, we're already starting to see it. I mean, there are a lot of slashes and budget issues that are coming up that people are trying to either forecast, trying to use the correct term there, or they're actually occurring right now, and they're experiencing that. So, as far as that creativity, I think that's going to happen a lot, potentially in the near future for a lot of school districts.
Without a doubt, in a certain sense, that might be a good thing with a lowercase g.
Mm-hmm.
You need another hour for me to get into that.
Well, I have to be careful because I would talk to you for another hour if I could. I love like tapping into your brain. I can tell there's a lot more to be said on this. So I want to kind of lead folks that are listening that if they want more information on this, not only for your book, but I know you just ran a webinar.
Yes.
And I'm going to have a link in the show notes for folks. It's through Solution Tree. And I know it's already occurred, but I think people can still access this. But will you just share a little bit about that webinar and what folks can obtain if they click on this link?
Sure. The webinar actually is sort of a mini lesson, just about an hour long, where I go through all the aspects of the book and I model and demonstrate each of those pieces that Joshua has asked questions about. And it was a couple of questions. I think as many as we had time for to work with. But it's sort of an overview of the book without and doesn't leave anything out all that much. And it also talks about some of these process skills I've just kind of alluded to. And I'm perfectly happy to, I'm really pleased if people were to look at it. Mm-hmm. And people can contact me through the social media links that you're going to put up. And it's fine if people want to, my email, you can use my email and just drop me a question. Or you can ask a question of Joshua, and then Joshua can pass it to me.
Of course.
If that's okay with you, Joshua.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh, yes.
And then we can continue the conversation because sometimes I talk about changes being just old wine in new bottles. And sometimes that's true. But the other times is I think that this dispositional premise of futuring and recreating needs to be recast and needs to be solidified as part of our leadership, part of the culture of any organization, and especially schools, especially today.
So as far as contacting Richard, I'll make sure that all the links are in the show notes for people to not only follow you, but be able to contact you. But I know you're always looking for folks to help with a nationwide simulation from a vast amount of regions. So we just kind of share kind of what your vision is for that and, why people should contact you.
Look at what I just did. I didn't do it on purpose, but I'm almost praying for this. In a certain sense, it's sort of what those, if you had 3 wishes sort of things. Yeah. I would like to use the book to solicit people interested in learning those skills and those dispositions to volunteer to be part of a nationwide simulation where people from all across the country would say, okay, what do you want to do? And I would work it into an online approach. Mm-hmm. And where Joshua might be the principal in the XYZ school district, and Mary Smith might be the union president or the board president, sort of on the other side of the table.
Sure.
In the world out there, where I would work them through the phases of the simulation cross country, and to see what happens. We'll have people from maybe from the Navajo Nation, as well as people from Colorado, as well as people from Brooklyn, and we'll see what. I would love to see what came out of that. I can't forecast what would come out of it.
Well, I'm going to forecast good things because when we put great minds together, good things happen. So anyone that's listening, if you're interested, we'll make sure that we have, like I said, the information to contact Richard. And I really hope that people take advantage of this opportunity to get a part of this nationwide simulation. I know it's going to help a lot of people, including the people that are participating in the simulation. So I want to talk about one last thing as far as a project that you are a part of, which is submissions for Scope Online. Will you just share a little bit about that publication?
Oh, thank you for reminding me. Yes, I'm the editor-in-chief of the Scope, SCOPE, Journal for Leadership and Instruction. It's a journal devoted to encouraging research and offering up ideas that about anything that has anything to do with instruction and leadership, really from K all the way up through doctoral and beyond. We've had some wonderful articles submitted from around the country. If you go on the link, you'll see the link over to me as the editor, and how to submit articles. We're constantly looking for quality articles. And then what we do with that is, for example, if Joshua were to write an article and it came up through us, and we accepted it for publication, then I would go back to the author and I asked the author to do a podcast with me, and sometimes a panel, depending on what the topic is. We did a great one on artificial intelligence when nobody heard of it at that point. I'm still thinking about, and so we have, we're trying to build that community, and I would really another gesture. Be great to see some of you say, let me take a crack at that. If you think you have a topic, just let me know what you're thinking about, and I'll give you some advice and some feedback and some mentoring if necessary.
Of course. Yeah. So the link is on the screen for those who are watching on YouTube, but I will make sure that the link, as always, is on my website and in the show notes for people. And yeah, if you have a great idea, definitely click on the link and submit your potential publication to Richard, and we'll see where that goes. But obviously, the more we can get wonderful ideas and examples and experiences, the better it's going to help the world of education. So love what you're doing, Rich. I want to throw up the book one more time for those who can see it. I know my Colorado sun is over the mountain and gleaming on this brilliant resource, but I really do want everyone to immediately go and grab the book. I think it's going to help a lot of folks in their leadership journey. But with that, Rich, would you just give a little bit of advice? If someone's listening, maybe it's a new or current leader, if there's something they could do today or tomorrow to enhance their leadership journey, what would you recommend?
Consider that premise of future. Take a look at it. There's lots of books out there and lots of great authors who talk about it and understand that the premise of practicing futuring, by the way, sometimes there's other names for it, but the premise of engaging and building your staff to have the capacity to recreate their culture can only improve what you're trying to do. And when I have a doctoral class, first when they're brand new and they walk in, and I say the same thing to them: you need to do research for a dissertation. And then I go on to say, and if you're not trying to change the world, there's the door. And sometimes they look at me like I'm talking like I'm crazy, and then sometimes they leave, because the short story is we're trying to make it better than what we do, because often it's pretty good, but other times it fails us, and it fails the children whom we're trying to educate and the communities that we're trying to recreate.
Yeah, I love that so much. All right, let's talk about how people can connect with you. So if there's maybe a social media application that you tend to favor more than others, how can people reach you?
Good question. LinkedIn, I suppose, is the one I work with the most, but also Facebook. I'm on and off face every day, but I'm too busy sometimes figuring out what Taylor Swift is doing. So,
well, we've got links for yeah, right. we've got links for X, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We'll make sure that that's in the show notes. And then, of course, Rich, if you want your email address in there, I can put that in there
Okay.
for folks to contact you. But Rich, is there any other ways that you support educators that people might maybe bring you in, or if there's anything else that you provide as far as services?
Yeah, I do a lot of strategic planning, facilitation here, there, and everywhere, and which is another word for futuring in my sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to work with my premise. We'll also show folks how to create their own simulations, whether it be instructionally or in terms of professional development. Also, kind of pride myself. I sometimes call myself this is kind of prideful, dissertation whisperer, which means that I'm good at getting folks across the finish line to do that, but that's not all that important so much as to say I'm very good at helping people figure out what their professional needs are. Very good at that, and I'm perfectly happy to mentor other folks as well as help people rewrite curriculum. That's my first, after simulation, that's probably my first love.
Right.
Most curriculum doesn't, it's still talking heads like I'm doing to you right now.
No, I think it's very different. And Rich, I love this conversation. I truly mean it when I could talk to you all day, because I don't know why I have such a curious mind in regards to the future and what education is going to look like, and all of the potential problems that you're talking about as far as forecasting. But I know for our aspiring and current leaders that are listening, that they're gaining a lot from your insights, from your knowledge, and from this book, Co-Creating the Future. So as always, I'm going to have the link to the book in the show notes for people to click on. I hope you grab this resource because it's brilliant, just like Rich. And man, I just appreciate all that you're doing, how you're supporting schools and leaders, how you're changing education. And I just really appreciate your time today, Rich.
I can't begin to tell you how much I appreciate meeting you as an individual, and I can see that you clearly have a great grounding yourself in lots of things that we share. We share the common values and hopes for, and I hope to work with you again.